My daughter needs me. She depends on me every single morning just to get out of bed. If something happens to her while I'm sitting in your jail cell, that's on you, Sheriff. That blood is on your hands." The handcuffs clicked. The deputies didn't flinch. And Sheriff Ethan Caldwell looked at the man in the leather vest and saw exactly what he expected to see a dangerous biker finally caught. He was wrong. And before the story ends, that mistake would cost him everything he thought he knew about justice. If this story moves you, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and follow along until the very last word. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The sun had barely cracked the horizon over Red Valley, Montana, when the first police cruiser turned onto Ridgeline Road. Then a second, then a third. Jack Lawson was already awake. He had been awake since 5 of the same as every morning because Emily needed her medication at 5:15, and if he missed that window, the next 2 hours would be brutal for her. He had learned that the hard way 3 years ago, and he never let it happen again. He was standing at the kitchen counter and measuring out her pills with the same careful hands he used to rebuild carburetor engines when he saw the lights through the window. Blue and red, flashing slow and steady like they weren't in any particular hurry, like they had already decided how this morning was going to go. Jack set the pill organizer down on the counter. He did not panic. He did not grab for anything. He simply straightened up to his full height, 6'2", broad across the shoulders with 4 arms like old hickory wood, and he walked to the front door. He opened it before they knocked. Sheriff Ethan Caldwell was standing on the bottom porch step, one hand resting on his belt, the other holding a folded piece of paper. Behind him, 4 deputies fanned out across the yard like they were expecting a firefight. Caldwell looked up at Jack and said, without any greeting, without any warmth, "Jack Lawson, we have a warrant to search your property and a warrant for your arrest." Jack looked at the paper. He looked at the deputies. He looked back at Caldwell. "On what charge?" he asked. "Possession of stolen construction equipment. 3 excavators, 2 heavy-duty flatbed trailers, and 1 hydraulic crane, all reported stolen from a site over in Dillon County 6 weeks ago." Caldwell's voice was steady, practiced the voice of a man who had done this 100 times and was doing it again. "All of it was found on your back acreage, Lawson, behind the tree line up near the old water tank." Jack did not move. He did not raise his voice. He just looked at the sheriff for a long moment, the way a man looks when he has been hit and is deciding whether the world is still real. "I bought that equipment," Jack said. "At auction. I have the paperwork." "We'll look at the paperwork," Caldwell said. "But right now I need you to step off that porch and put your hands where I can see them." And that was when Emily's voice came from behind him. "Dad." She was standing in the hallway in her pajamas, one hand pressed against the wall for balance. Emily Lawson was 24 years old and looked like she should have been younger because the years since her diagnosis had taken something from her face that most people don't lose until they're much older. She had her father's dark eyes, though sharp and clear, and full of something that didn't back down easy. "Dad, what's happening?" Jack turned to look at her, and the expression on his face shifted into something that had nothing to do with police or warrants or flashing lights. It became quiet, deliberate, the face of a man forcing himself to be the calm thing in the room so that his child doesn't have to be afraid. "It's okay, Em," he said. "Go back inside. Take your medication. The pills are already on the counter. The water's in the blue cup. I'll be back before lunch." "Dad, Emily." His voice was low, not harsh, just certain. "Go. Take your medicine. Lock the door. Call Mrs. Pemberton next door if you need anything." She looked past him at the sheriff. She looked at the deputies. Her jaw tightened. "What did he do?" "Nothing," Jack said, and his voice didn't waver even a fraction. "This is a misunderstanding, and it's going to get sorted out. But right now, I need you to go inside." He held her gaze until she nodded barely, and then she turned and disappeared back into the hallway. Jack stepped off the porch. He turned slowly, placed his hands behind his head without being asked, and let the nearest deputy step forward and cuff him. Then, and only then, did he look at Sheriff Caldwell directly. "My daughter has a neuromuscular condition," he said. "She can't drive. She has a doctor's appointment at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I need someone to make sure she gets there." Caldwell's face didn't move. "Mr. Lawson, that's not our responsibility." "No," Jack said. "It's mine, and you're taking me away from it." He held the sheriff's gaze. "If something happens to her while I'm sitting in your jail cell, that responsibility belongs to you." I want you to hear that clearly. I want you to remember I said it. Caldwell looked at him for one long moment. Then he looked away and said, put him in the car. The drive to the county jail took 37 minutes. Jack spent those 37 minutes thinking about Emily, not about himself. He thought about whether she'd remember to eat something with the medication, because taking it on an empty stomach made her sick. He thought about whether she'd be able to reach Mrs. Pemberton's number on her own, or whether she'd try to handle everything herself the way she always did, the way he had raised her, and simultaneously regretted raising her because her pride was sometimes stronger than her body. He thought about her face in the hallway, the way she had looked at him. Not afraid for herself, afraid for him. He pressed his back against the seat and stared at the back of the headrest and told himself that this would be sorted out by noon. He had the auction receipts. He had the photographs from the day of purchase. He had the transfer of title paperwork. He had everything. This would be fixed. He almost believed it. The booking process was everything. Booking processes always are slow, deliberately impersonal, designed to strip away the individual and leave behind only a number. Jack went through it without complaint. He gave his name, his date of birth, his address. He handed over his wallet, his watch, the keys to the ranch, and the small photograph he always carried in his front shirt pocket. Emily at 17, standing next to the first motorcycle she ever helped him rebuild, grinning so wide it looked like her face might split. The deputy who processed him, a young man named Stevens, who couldn't have been more than 25, glanced at the photograph and then at Jack's leather vest, specifically at the patch on the back, and his expression shifted into something careful. Hell's Angels. Stevens said, not quite a question. Member in good standing for 22 years, Jack said. Stevens said nothing to that. He filed the photograph with the rest of Jack's belongings and moved on. Jack was given a holding cell. There were 2 other men in it, both younger, both watching him with the sideways assessment that people do when a stranger enters a confined space. Jack nodded at them, chose a corner bench, sat down and waited. He was good at waiting. He'd had a lot of practice. What Jack did not know, sitting in that holding cell, was what was happening back at his ranch. And the deputies had moved through his property with the methodical indifference of people executing a task rather than searching for truth. They photographed the equipment behind the tree line. They documented the serial numbers. They made their reports, but one of them was doing something different. Deputy Ryan Mitchell was 28 years old and had been with the Red Valley Sheriff's Department for 3 years. He was not someone who asked a lot of questions out loud because he had learned early that asking questions out loud made people defensive, and defensive people stopped talking. So he asked his questions quietly in his own head while he looked at things that other people walked past. And the thing Ryan Mitchell was looking at standing in Jack Lawson's equipment yard in the growing mid-morning light was the documentation Jack had mentioned. He found it in the metal filing cabinet, in the barn, the cabinet that was so organized it almost startled him, because it was not the cabinet of a man who had something to hide. It was the cabinet of a man who had spent years making sure everything he did was above board, because he knew that people would look at his patch in his leather vest and assume the worst, and he had decided long ago that the best defense against that assumption was a paper trail that was completely unimpeachable. Ryan pulled out the auction file. The paperwork was immaculate. Purchase receipts with the county auction office's stamp. Serial numbers for every piece of equipment matching the transfer of title documents filed with the state. Photographs dated and time-stamped from the morning Jack had picked up the equipment, Jack himself in the pictures, smiling, standing next to a county official who was clearly handing him the keys. Ryan looked at the equipment serial numbers in the arrest file. He looked at the serial numbers in Jack's paperwork. They were not the same. He stood there for a moment, very still, holding both documents. They were not the same. The serial numbers on the equipment sitting in Jack Lawson's field did not match the serial numbers on Jack Lawson's purchase receipts, which meant one of 2 things. Either the equipment had been switched at some point between purchase and today, or the equipment sitting in Jack's field was not the equipment Jack had bought. Ryan looked around the barn. He looked at the clean floor, the organized shelving, the labeled bins of spare parts. He looked at the photograph on the barn wall. Emily and Jack at what appeared to be a county fair, both of them laughing at something off camera. He put the file under his arm and went to find Sheriff Caldwell. Back in the holding cell, Jack's mind had settled into the particular kind of quiet that comes when a person accepts that they cannot control what is happening and decides instead to control what they can. He could control his breathing. He was doing that. He could control his posture. He was sitting upright instead of slouched, because slouching was how people signaled defeat, and he had not been defeated. He had been lied to, and those were two very different things. He could control what he thought about, so he thought about Emily. I thought about the morning 3 years ago, when the diagnosis had finally come, not as a surprise because they had both known something was wrong for months, but as a sentence. The word the neurologist used was degenerative, and Jack remembered very clearly that he had not heard much of what came after that word because his brain had locked onto it like a vice and wouldn't let go. Degenerative, meaning it was going to get worse, meaning all the mornings he had now with Emily still able to walk, still able to dress herself, still able to sit at the kitchen table and eat breakfast and argue with him about whether country music was better than classic rock. Those mornings were numbered. Hung had driven her home that day and made her a grilled cheese sandwich because it was her favorite, and he had sat across from her at the table and said, "Tell me what you need. Tell me exactly what you need, and I will make sure you have it." She had looked at him with those dark eyes and said, "I need you to not treat me like I'm already gone." He hadn't. He didn't. Every single day he made sure of that. Every single day he got up at 5, measured the medication, made breakfast, helped her with whatever she needed help with, and made sure she knew not with words because words were easy, but with actions because actions were the only currency that actually meant anything, that she was not alone. And now he was sitting in a county jail cell and she was alone, and somebody had put him here on purpose. He just didn't know who yet. The first visitor he got was not a lawyer. It was a man named Darnell Brooks. Darnell was 51 years old, built like a man who had spent his life doing physical work and saw no reason to stop, and he was wearing a leather vest with the same patch on the back as Jack's. He had driven 90 miles from Billings the moment he got the call, and he came into the visitation room with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face set in the expression of a man who is very deliberately not showing everything he is feeling. He sat down across from Jack and said without any preamble, "Talk." Jack talked. He told Darnell everything: the deputies arriving, the arrest warrant, the equipment in the field, the serial number discrepancy he had mentioned to one of the deputies, the fact that Emily was home alone, the fact that his 2 o'clock court hearing was already at risk of being rescheduled. Darnell listened without interrupting. When Jack finished, Darnell said, "The auction receipts. In the filing cabinet in the barn. Ryan Mitchell, one of the deputies, I think he saw them. The look on his face when I mentioned them told me he was actually going to check." "And you trust him?" "I don't know him well enough to trust him," Jack said, "but I know the look of a man who's asking himself the right questions." He had that look. Darnell leaned back in his chair and looked at Jack for a long moment. "You know this isn't random," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know," Jack said. "Harrington." Jack said nothing for a moment. Then he made another offer 2 months ago, $70,000 over market value. I told him the same thing I've told him every time: the land's not for sale. Darnell's jaw tightened. 70,000 over? "The land's not for sale," Jack said again, quiet and final. "It was my grandfather's land. Emily grew up on that land. Whatever's under it, whatever Harrington wants from it, that's not the reason I'm keeping it. I'm keeping it because it's ours, because it's the only thing I've got left to give her." There was a silence between them that was not uncomfortable, the silence of two men who have known each other long enough to not need to fill every moment with words. Then Darnell said, "I'm going to make some calls." "I know," Jack said. "It's going to get loud for a while." "I know that too." "You okay?" Jack looked at him, really looked at him the way you look at a person when the question is real and not just courtesy. "I'm in a county jail on a charge I didn't commit. My daughter is home alone, and someone is trying to take my land," he said. "I'm not okay, but I'll be fine. There's a difference." Darnell nodded once. He stood. He put his hand briefly on Jack's shoulder, just for a second, just the weight of it, and then he walked back out of the visitation room. By the time Darnell reached his truck in the parking lot, he was already on his phone. Word travels fast within a brotherhood. That is one of the things people who fear the patch do not understand. It is not chaos that holds these men together. It is loyalty, accountability, the kind of bond that does not form at happy hours or company retreats, but in the long years of riding side by side through weather and distance, in trouble learning who a man really is when things go wrong. The calls went out. Within 2 hours, 6 members from 3 different chapters had been reached. Within 4 hours, 12. By the end of the day, more than 20 people who had known Jack Lawson for years, some for decades, were making their own calls, pulling their own records, reaching out to their own contacts. Not to intimidate, to document, because that was what Jack needed. Not muscle, not noise, not the kind of response that would confirm every stereotype Caldwell and the town had already assigned to the patch. What he needed was truth, and the men who knew him best understood that without being told. Back in the sheriff's department, Ryan Mitchell had spread the documents across his desk. Caldwell was standing across from him, arms folded, looking at the papers with an expression that Ryan had learned to read over 3 years. The expression of a man who had already made a decision and was now confronted with information that complicated it. The serial numbers don't match, Ryan said again, because sometimes you have to say the obvious thing twice to make it real. I see that, Caldwell said. Sheriff, the equipment in his field is not the equipment Jack Lawson bought at auction, which means either someone moved equipment onto his land or the tip we received was pointing us at something that was staged. Caldwell was quiet for a moment. He picked up one of the receipts and looked at it. Who gave us the tip? Ryan asked. Caldwell set the receipt down. Anonymous call. Came in through the main line. Was it recorded? Standard protocol says yes. Have you listened to it? Caldwell looked at him. There was something in his expression that Ryan couldn't fully read. Not dishonesty, not exactly, but something adjacent to it. The look of a man who had moved forward so confidently in one direction that backing up felt like losing something. Pull the recording, Ryan said, and I want to know who owns the equipment that's actually sitting in that field. If we trace those serials, they'll lead somewhere. Caldwell was quiet for another moment. Then he said very slowly, pull the recording. Ryan was already reaching for his phone. The recording was 22 seconds long. The voice was male, measured with the careful enunciation of someone who had thought about what they were going to say before they said it. Not nervous, not hurried, deliberate. I'd like to report stolen construction equipment being stored on private property at 4412 Ridgeline Road. The property belongs to a Jack Lawson, a member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. The equipment has been there for approximately 2 weeks. I believe there may also be other illegal activity on the property. That last sentence, Ryan played it back. I believe there may also be other illegal activity on the property. Not I know. Not I've seen. I believe there may be. The careful language of a man covering himself. The careful language of a man who was not actually reporting something he had witnessed, but constructing a narrative and then calling it in. Ryan traced the call. It came from a prepaid phone purchased at a convenience store in Billings 3 days before the call was made. Paid in cash. Ryan sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he pulled up the county property records for 4412 Ridgeline Road. Then he pulled up the records of every offer ever made on that property. And there it was, 4 offers over the past 6 years, each one larger than the last. The most recent one 2 months ago for a number that made Ryan's eyebrows go up because it was not a number that made sense for a Montana ranch unless you knew something about what was under the ground that the public records didn't show. The offers all came from the same entity, Harrington Development Group, LLC. Ryan wrote the name down. He underlined it once. Then he went to find the sheriff. Caldwell was in his office when Ryan knocked. Harrington Development, Ryan said before he was fully through the door. Caldwell looked up from his desk. 4 offers on Lawson's property going back 6 years, Ryan continued. Each one bigger than the last. Most recent offer was 2 months ago, and the anonymous tip came from a prepaid phone bought for cash in Billings 3 days before it was called in. He set the papers on the desk. The serial numbers on the equipment don't match Lawson's receipts. The tip is untraceable. And someone with a very specific financial interest in getting Jack Lawson off that ranch just happened to send us there. Caldwell looked at the papers. He looked at Ryan. He looked back at the papers. The silence in the room was different from the silence of earlier. This one had weight. You think Harrington staged this, Caldwell said. I think someone staged this, Ryan said. And I think the only person with enough motive, enough resources, and enough information about Jack Lawson's property to pull it off is the man who's been trying to buy it for 6 years. Caldwell picked up the sheet with the offer history and looked at it. Ryan waited. He had learned that sometimes the most important thing you could do in a conversation was stop talking and let the other person catch up. Caldwell set the paper down. He pressed both palms flat on the desk. He breathed in. He breathed out. "Get me everything you have on Harrington Development," he said. Ryan was already walking back toward his desk. Jack Lawson had been in that holding cell for 11 hours when he was brought back to the processing area and told that his bail hearing had been moved up. He walked into the hearing room and saw Darnell in the back row. And next to Darnell and in the 3 rows behind him were men. Men in leather vests, men of varying ages from 30 to 60, from different walks of life, with different faces and different histories in the same patch. 21 of them. They had not come to intimidate. They had not come to make noise. They were sitting with their hands folded and their backs straight and their faces quiet, and each one of them was holding a folder. Jack looked at them for a moment. He turned back toward the front of the room. He sat down. I didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He had felt the same thing they were all feeling, the particular specific warmth of not being alone in a cold room, and it was enough to settle something in his chest that had been tight for 11 hours. The judge called the hearing to order, and across town in an office with a view of the mountains, a man named Victor Harrington was on the phone with his lawyer, and his voice for the first time in years had something in it that had not been there before. It sounded like doubt. It sounded like the beginning of fear. Jack sat in the hard courthouse chair and focused on breathing. Steady in, steady out. The way he had taught himself years ago in a different kind of hard moment when the world had gone sideways and breathing was the only thing he could actually control. His attorney, a woman named Grace Allard, who had driven 4 hours from Missoula the moment Darnell called her, was sitting beside him and going through the folder of documents with the kind of focused intensity that made Jack feel for the first time since the handcuffs clicked that things might actually be all right. The serial numbers, she said quietly, leaning toward him, not looking up from the pages. Ryan Mitchell flagged this during the search. It's in the deputy's own report. I know, Jack said. That's going to matter tonight. A lot. I know, he said again. She glanced at him sideways. You're very calm for a man who's been in a holding cell for 11 hours. I've been in worse situations, he said. Have you? He thought about it. No, he admitted. But I've been scared before, and being scared never helped anything, so I stopped practicing it. Grace almost smiled. She went back to the documents. The judge came in. The bailiff called the room to order, and everything that was about to happen, the bail decision, the evidence questions, the first visible crack in the case against Jack Lawson. All of it began with a document that one careful questioning young deputy had pulled from a metal filing cabinet in a clean Montana barn. The truth had been there the whole time. It was just waiting for someone to look. The bail hearing lasted 40 minutes. Grace Allard stood up in that courtroom and did what good lawyers do when the facts are on their side. She let the facts speak first and then stepped out of the way. She placed the auction receipts on the table. She placed Ryan Mitchell's deputy report beside them. She placed the serial number comparison, the one Ryan had documented himself in his own handwriting, in his own official report, front and center, where the judge couldn't look anywhere else without seeing it. Your Honor, Grace said, my client was arrested this morning based on an anonymous tip from an untraceable prepaid phone. The equipment cited in the arrest warrant has serial numbers that do not match the equipment my client legally purchased at a county-certified auction 6 weeks ago. The discrepancy is documented in the arresting deputy's own report. We are not arguing that a crime didn't occur. We are arguing that the wrong man is sitting in that chair. The prosecuting attorney, a man named Dale Forsyth, who had been doing this job for 16 years and had the look of a man who had seen every angle of every argument, shifted in his seat. He looked at the serial number comparison. He looked at Grace. He looked at the judge. He did not look at Jack. That told Jack something. The judge, a woman named Patricia Holt, who had been on the bench in Red Valley for 11 years and had the particular kind of patience that comes from having heard every possible story a human being can tell, looked at both sets of serial numbers for a long time without speaking. Then she said, Mr. Forsyth, were you aware of this discrepancy before this hearing? Forsyth cleared his throat. We became aware of it earlier today, Your Honor. And did you communicate that to the defense? A pause, a very short pause, but the kind that carries weight. We were still evaluating and the answer to my question, Judge Holt said, is no. The room was very quiet. Bail is set at $5,000, the judge said. Mr. Lawson, you are not to leave Red Valley County. You are to surrender your passport if you have one. And Mr. Forsyth, she looked at the prosecutor with an expression that could strip paint. I expect full disclosure of all evidence to the defense within 24 hours. Are we clear? Yes, Your Honor. Good, because the next time I see a discrepancy like this in my courtroom, without prior disclosure, we're going to have a very different kind of conversation. The gavel came down. Jack exhaled for what felt like the first time in 11 hours. Darnell had the bail money before the paperwork was finished. The drive back to the ranch was quiet. Darnell drove. Jack sat in the passenger seat with his elbow on the window ledge and his eyes on the road ahead, watching the landscape of Red Valley scroll past the hills he had ridden through 1,000 times, the turnoffs he knew by muscle memory, the landmarks that had been the background of his whole life. He felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not relief, not anger. Something slower and stranger than either of those, the particular emotional exhaustion that settles in after a crisis when your body finally starts accounting for all the tension it held without your permission. You okay? Darnell said. You already asked me that today, Jack said. I'm asking again. Jack looked at him. Emily, I need to know she's okay before I'm anything. Darnell nodded and said nothing more. They turned on to Ridgeline Road, and Jack saw the lights in the farmhouse window before anything else, and something in his chest loosened that he hadn't known was still clenched. He was out of the truck before it fully stopped moving across the yard with the particular urgency of a man who has been separated from the person they love most and cannot fully breathe until they close that distance. He pushed open the front door. Emily was at the kitchen table. She was not sitting quietly. She was not resting. She was sitting at the table with Jack's filing cabinet open beside her. 3 folders spread across the surface, a legal pad covered in her handwriting, and a cold cup of tea she had clearly forgotten to drink. Her laptop was open. There were 2 browser tabs visible from where he stood. She looked up when he came in. For 1 second, just one, her face did exactly what she had spent years teaching it not to do. It cracked open. Her eyes filled. Her jaw tightened the way it does when you are absolutely not going to cry, but your body hasn't gotten the message yet. Then she pulled it back together. I made Mrs. Pemberton go home, she said. She was hovering. I went to the 2:00 appointment by myself. I called a cab. Her voice was level, controlled. The same control she had learned from him, which was both the thing he was most proud of and the thing that broke his heart a little right now. DeReeves says my levels are stable, in case you were going to ask. I was going to ask, he said. I know. She looked at the files on the table. I've been going through the auction paperwork. I called the county clerk's office this afternoon. I talked to a woman named Sandra who was actually at that auction and remembers you being there. I got her direct number. She held up the legal pad, and I found something in the transfer of title documentation that I think might matter. Jack stood in the doorway and looked at his daughter, 24 years old, fighting a body that was slowly going to war against her, sitting at a kitchen table with a legal pad and a cold cup of tea working to save their home, while he was sitting in a county jail cell, and he felt something move through him that had no clean name. It was love, obviously, but it was also something more specific than that. It was the recognition of a person. The full, clear-eyed recognition of who Emily Lawson actually was, beyond being his daughter, beyond being sick, beyond everything he had spent years trying to protect her from. She was the kind of person who called the county clerk's office and got Sandra's direct number. She was the kind of person who went to her own doctor's appointment in a cab without calling him to make him feel guilty about it. She was the kind of person who spread files across a kitchen table and found things that mattered. He crossed the room in 4 steps and put his arms around her from behind, and she let him. Stayed that way for a moment that neither of them was going to talk about, but both of them were going to carry. What did you find? He said close to her ear. She put her hand on his arm. Squeezed once, then pulled back into herself and picked up the legal pad. The transfer of title was filed under a specific auction lot number, she said back in her steady, focused voice. Lot 14B. But the equipment serial numbers in your arrest file don't correspond to anything in Lot 14B. They correspond to a different lot, Lot 22F, which was listed as unsold at the same auction. Jack stared at her. Unsold, he said. Officially unsold, which means the equipment technically still belongs to the auction house until someone files a claim on it. Except, She turned the legal pad so he could see it. The auction house has no record of lot 22F leaving their storage facility. The room was very quiet. Someone moved equipment that officially doesn't exist, Jack said slowly. Someone moved equipment that the auction house doesn't know is missing yet, Emily said. And then they put it on our property and called the police. Jack straightened up. He stood there for a moment processing the full architecture of what he was looking at. Not just a frame-up that required specific knowledge of the auction, lots of the serial numbers of which equipment was unsold and untraceable of his property, of his land, layout of exactly where behind the tree line to put things so they'd be found by deputies, but not visible from the road. Someone who knew all of that, someone who had been studying him. Darnell, Jack called toward the front door. Darnell appeared in the doorway. We need to call Grace. Grace Allard arrived at the ranch at 8:30 that evening, still in her court clothes with a briefcase and a thermos of coffee and the expression of a woman who had just added significant new information to a case she thought she already understood. She sat across from Emily at the kitchen table and looked at the legal pad and said very quietly, "How did you find this?" "I know my dad's filing system," Emily said. "I know every document in this house." Grace looked at the document. She looked at Emily. She looked at Jack. "This is not minor," she said. "This is not a small thing. If the serial numbers on the equipment in your field trace to lot 22F from that auction equipment that never officially left the auction house's possession, then whoever put that equipment on your property had to have either stolen it from storage or had access to the auction house's inventory records to know which lot to use. Which requires someone with reach," Darnell said from across the room. "Which requires someone with resources," Grace agreed, "and planning. This wasn't impulsive. Someone thought this through." Jack looked at Grace. "Harrington." "I can't say that yet," she said, "not until I have something that connects him to the equipment specifically." "But you're thinking it." She didn't answer that directly. Instead, she said, "I'm going to need Ryan Mitchell." "The deputy," Darnell said. "The deputy who flagged the serial number discrepancy before anyone else did." She put the legal pad in her briefcase. "He's either very thorough or he already suspects something and is documenting it carefully. Either way, I want to talk to him before Forsyth's office does." Jack nodded. "One more thing," Grace said. She looked at all three of them. "Whatever happens next, whatever you find out, whatever gets said around town, nobody talks to anyone outside this room. Not to neighbors, not to friends, not on the phone unless it's encrypted." She looked at Darnell specifically. "I mean anyone." Darnell raised his hands. "We know how to be quiet." "I know you do," Grace said. "I'm saying it anyway because the person who set this up is watching. They called in the tip and waited for the arrest. They are paying attention. And the moment they realize we found the lot number discrepancy, the window closes." She stood, snapped her briefcase shut, picked up her thermos. "I'll be back at 7 tomorrow morning. We have a narrow window and I intend to use every inch of it." She was out the door before anyone could respond. Emily looked at Jack. "I like her," she said. "Yeah," Jack said. "Me too." Ryan Mitchell did not sleep well that night. He lay in his apartment above the hardware store on Main Street and stared at the ceiling and turned the serial numbers over in his head like a man working a puzzle piece that doesn't fit no matter which way you rotate it. He had already submitted his report. He had already flagged the discrepancy to Caldwell. What happened next was technically out of his hands. Technically. But Ryan had not gotten into law enforcement because he liked doing the minimum required and walking away. He had gotten into it because his older brother had been arrested when Ryan was 16, arrested on someone else's word without enough evidence, and held for 3 days before the actual suspect was identified. 3 days during which his family had watched his brother, a quiet, careful man who kept a garden and coached Little League, treated as guilty by everyone who heard the story before they heard the truth. Ryan had been 16 and helpless. I was 28 now, and he was not helpless, and he was going to do this right. He got up at 5:30. He made coffee. He went to his desk and pulled out the notes he had made that afternoon, not in the official file, but in his personal notebook, because he had learned that some things were worth keeping separate until you knew which direction they were pointing. He had written down the lot number from Jack's auction receipts. He had written down the serial numbers from the equipment in the field. He had drawn a line between them and written 2 words, "Don't match." Below that, who knew about the property, how long before the tip. Below that, Harrington Development. He had circled it. twice. He called the county auction house at 8 o'clock when they opened and asked to speak to whoever managed their inventory records. I was transferred twice. He ended up talking to a man named Gerald Pruitt, who was the auction house's property manager, and had been for 19 years, and had the kind of careful, detail-oriented voice that suggested he took his job seriously. Ryan explained that he was following up on an arrest case and needed to verify the status of certain auction lots. He gave Gerald the lot numbers. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Ryan could hear him typing. Then Gerald said, Lot 22F. Yes, that was listed as unsold at the October auction. Another pause. That equipment is supposed to be in our storage facility in Bay 4. Is it? Ryan said. Another pause. Longer this time. Deputy Mitchell, Gerald said slowly, and his voice had changed. I'm going to need to call you back. The line went quiet for 11 minutes. Ryan sat at his desk and counted them. When Gerald called back, his voice had changed again. This time into something tighter, something that had the sound of a man who has just discovered that something he was responsible for is not where it is supposed to be. The equipment from Lot 22F, Gerald said. Bay 4, Ryan's hand tightened on the phone. When was the last documented check on that bay, he said. 6 weeks ago. Routine inventory. Everything was marked present. A breath. I don't know how. Gerald, Ryan's voice was steady. I need you to pull your access logs for Bay 4. Who has had authorized entry to that storage area in the last 8 weeks? I can do that. It might take me a couple hours. I'll wait, Ryan said. He hung up and sat very still for a moment. Then he called Grace Allard. The conversation between Ryan Mitchell and Grace Allard lasted 22 minutes and covered 3 critical pieces of information that when placed side by side formed a picture that neither of them could look away from. The first piece was the lot number discrepancy that Emily had found. The second piece was Gerald Pruitt's discovery that lot 22F was missing from storage. The third piece, the one that Ryan had found at 6:30 that morning, going back through the county property purchaser records for the 4th time, was a filing from 8 months ago in which Harrington Development Group had commissioned a geological survey of a parcel of land in Red Valley County. The survey had not been filed under Harrington's name. It had been filed under a shell company, MDR Property Solutions LLC, which had no other filings in Montana and whose registered agent address was a UPS store in Billings. But the parcel number on the survey matched the parcel number for 4412 Ridgeline Road, Jack Lawson's ranch. Ryan read it out loud to Grace. There was silence on her end of the line. Then she said, he had a geological survey done on Jack's property without Jack's knowledge. 8 months ago, Ryan said, which means he knew what was under that land at least 8 months ago, which means every offer he made after that point wasn't just about the land, Grace said. It was about what's under it. Mineral rights, Ryan said. What kind, Grace asked. I don't know yet. The survey results weren't filed publicly. But the fact that the offer 2 months ago was $70,000 over market value. He paused. Whatever's under that land, it's worth a lot more than $70,000 over market value. Grace was quiet for a moment. Ryan could almost hear her thinking. I need you to get me those access logs from Gerald Pruitt, she said. And Ryan, I need you to be very careful about how you handle this from here. Document everything. Keep copies outside the department system. I already am, he said. Good, she paused. You're taking a risk here, you know that. I know, he said. Why? It was a direct question, and she asked it with the directness of someone who actually wanted the answer, not as a courtesy. Ryan thought about his brother, about the 3 days, about the little league team that didn't have a coach while their coach was sitting in a holding cell. Because the wrong person is sitting in a jail cell, he said, or was, anyway, and that matters to me. Grace was quiet for one more moment. Get me those logs, she said. We're going to need them. Sheriff Caldwell called Ryan into his office at 10:15 that morning. Ryan sat down across from the desk and felt the particular atmosphere of the room, the kind that gathers before a difficult conversation, the way air pressure changes before a storm, and he kept his face neutral and waited. Caldwell looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, You've been busy. I've been thorough, Ryan said. Caldwell's jaw moved. There's a difference between being thorough and running a parallel investigation without informing your supervising officer. I submitted my report yesterday. The serial number discrepancy was in it. Your report, yes. The calls to the auction house this morning were not in any report I've seen. Ryan held his gaze. I was following up on information in my report. Another silence. Caldwell leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at Ryan. What did the auction house tell you? He asked. Ryan told him. He told him everything. Gerald Pruitt, the missing equipment from lot 22F, the access logs that were currently being pulled, the geological survey filed under MDR Property Solutions. He told it cleanly and in order the way he had organized it in his notebook, because the best way to make information land was to deliver it without extra weight. When he finished, the room was quiet. Caldwell was looking at the desk, not at Ryan, at the desk, like the surface of it held something he was reading. Harrington, he said, not a question, more like a man saying a name out loud to hear what it cost him. The evidence is pointing that direction, Ryan said, strongly. Caldwell pressed both his hands flat on the desk, the same gesture Ryan had seen him make yesterday in this same room when Ryan had first shown him the serial numbers. Like the desk was the thing keeping him anchored. I arrested the wrong man, Caldwell said. It was not a question. The charges were based on evidence that appears to have been planted, Ryan said carefully. That's not what I asked. Caldwell looked up at him. I asked, did I arrest the wrong man? Ryan held his gaze. Yes, sir, I believe you did. Another long silence. Something moved across Caldwell's face. Not guilt exactly, not yet, but the precursor to it, the moment when a person first fully lets a mistake become real inside them instead of keeping it at arm's length. Get me the access logs, Caldwell said. Whatever Pruitt has, I want it on my desk by end of day. Yes, sir. And Mitchell. Caldwell's voice changed, went quieter, firmer, with the particular weight of a man saying something he has decided. Whatever I may have said yesterday about running parallel lines, you were right to pull on this thread. That's on the record. Ryan nodded once. He stood. One more thing, Caldwell said. Ryan stopped. Harrington has lawyers, Caldwell said. Good ones. The kind that make things complicated the moment you put a file on their client's desk. Whatever we do next, we do it clean. We do it airtight. I am not giving anyone an excuse to make this about anything other than the evidence. Understood, Ryan said. He walked out of the office and did not allow himself to feel anything about that conversation until he was back at his own desk. And even then, he only allowed it for a moment. A brief, controlled acknowledgement of the fact that something important had just shifted before he picked up his phone and called Gerald Pruitt. The access logs arrived at 12:47. Ryan spread them across his desk and read through them with the same careful attention he had given everything else in this case. Names, dates, times, entry, and exit records for Bay 4 of the auction house storage facility over the past 8 weeks. Most of the entries were routine. Gerald himself, 2 maintenance workers, 1 independent appraiser. But there was an entry on a Tuesday night 6 weeks ago at 11:47 p.m. that was not routine in any way. The access code used was a contractor code, a temporary authorization issued to a company that had done HVAC work on the facility 2 months before the auction. That code had officially expired 30 days after the work was completed, but someone had used it anyway. Either the system hadn't updated properly, a technical failure, a glitch, the kind of gap that existed in every institutional system. If you knew where to look or someone had known the code was still active and used it deliberately. Ryan looked up the contractor. The company was called High Plains Climate Solutions. He searched the Montana Secretary of State's business registry. High Plains Climate Solutions had been registered 18 months ago. Its registered agent was the same UPS store in Billings as MDR Property Solutions. Ryan set down the access log. He sat very still. Same UPS store, same Billings address, 2 shell companies. One was used to file a secret geological survey on Jack Lawson's property. One was used to perform HVAC work on the storage facility, where the equipment for Lot 22F was kept, work that happened to leave a valid access code that someone used on a Tuesday night to remove equipment that was then placed on Jack Lawson's ranch and called into the police by a voice on a prepaid phone. Ryan picked up his notebook. He wrote it all out, connected with arrows in the clear, clean handwriting his mother had always praised and that he now used to lay out every piece of evidence he had ever gathered. He looked at what he had written. This was not a frame-up put together in a hurry by someone who was angry. This was a plan, a careful, layered, months-long plan put together by someone who believed they were untouchable. Someone who was so used to getting what they wanted through resources and lawyers, and the kind of quiet institutional leverage that doesn't leave fingerprints, that when a man in a leather vest looked at them and said, "The land isn't for sale," they had simply decided to remove the obstacle instead of accepting the answer. And they had done it by counting on exactly what happened, that a man wearing a Hells Angels patch would be believed guilty before anyone looked at the evidence, that the patch would do the convincing for them. Ryan picked up his phone and called Grace. "I have the access logs," he said when she answered. "What do you have?" she said. He told her about the contractor code, the HVAC company, the UPS store, the second shell. Grace was quiet for a long time. "Ryan," she finally said, and her voice had the quality of someone who has just seen something come fully into focus. "I want you to hear me clearly. What you just described is not just a frame-up. What you just described is organized fraud conspiracy to deprive a person of their property rights in evidence tampering. This is federal territory." "I know," he said. "Does Caldwell know yet?" "Not the HVAC piece. I found it 20 minutes ago." "Go to him," she said. "Right now. Don't email it. Don't call it in. Go in person, put the paper in front of him, and let him read it. And then the two of you need to decide together whether this goes to the county attorney or whether it goes higher." "How much higher?" Ryan said. "If the mineral rights under that ranch are worth what I think they might be based on the offer history," Grace said, "we might be talking about a motive that involves people above the county level, which means we need to be very careful about which direction we take this and with whom." Ryan looked at his notebook. He looked at the arrows connecting everything. "I'll go to Caldwell now," he said. "Good." Grace paused. "And Ryan, tell Caldwell that Jack Lawson needs to know he's not going home to a normal life just yet. The charges may have been the easy part. The harder thing is going to be making sure Harrington doesn't find another way to come at that ranch before we close this." Ryan hung up. He gathered the documents, put them in order, and walked down the hallway toward Caldwell's office. Through the window, at the end of the hall, he could see the hills above Red Valley, pale and steady in the late morning light. The same hills Jack Lawson had ridden through for decades. The same hills that stood above a ranch that one man had spent his life building and another man had spent months trying to take. Ryan knocked on the sheriff's door. "Come in," Caldwell said. Ryan came in. He put the papers on the desk. And the sheriff of Red Valley, Montana looked down at the evidence and felt the full weight of what he had set in motion land on him. At last, not a small mistake, not a procedural error, but something that went all the way down to the bone. The realization that he had given a powerful man his best weapon by doing exactly what that man had counted on him to do. He had looked at the patch and stopped looking at the person, and now it was time to fix it. Caldwell read the documents twice. He did not say anything the first time through. He read with the careful, deliberate attention of a man who understood that speed was a luxury he could not afford right now, that every word on those pages needed to settle correctly before he responded to any of it. Ryan stood across from the desk and waited, because he had learned that the most important thing you could do when you put evidence in front of someone was to let them arrive at it on their own. The second time through, Caldwell's jaw tightened. By the time he set the papers down, something in his face had changed in a way Ryan had not seen before in 3 years of working for him. Caldwell was not a man who showed much. He had that quality that a lot of long-serving law enforcement officers develop: the deliberate suppression of visible reaction, the trained neutrality that keeps a room from escalating. But right now, underneath that neutrality, something was burning. 2 shell companies, Caldwell said. "Same address. Same UPS store in Billings," Ryan confirmed. "The HVAC contractor left a live access code." "That's what the logs show." Caldwell pressed 2 fingers against his mouth and looked at the documents. "And someone used that code on a Tuesday night at 11:47 p.m. to remove equipment from a storage bay. Equipment that was then placed on Jack Lawson's property and reported to us by an anonymous call from a prepaid phone." Caldwell looked up. His eyes were steady, but the steadiness was the kind that requires effort. "Someone built this whole thing." "Yes, sir. They built it knowing we would come." Ryan said nothing, because that was the part that didn't need saying. Caldwell already knew it, had probably known it from the moment he looked at the serial numbers, but knowing something and fully accepting it are 2 different processes, and some things take a moment to travel all the way from the head to somewhere deeper. Caldwell stood. He walked to the window. He stood there for a moment with his back to Ryan, and Ryan got the sense that this was not a man looking out at anything in particular, but a man needing to be vertical while he thought. Harrington didn't just frame a man, Caldwell said to the window more than to Ryan. He used us to do it. He used this department as his instrument. Yes, sir. Caldwell turned around. His decision was already made. Ryan could see it in his posture, in the way his shoulders had settled into something more definite. I'm calling the county attorney. Not through the normal channel. I'm calling her personal cell, and I'm going to her office with everything we have. This does not go through the department system until I know who else might have access to it. Ryan nodded. You've been keeping your notes off the system, Caldwell said. Yes, sir. Good. Keep them that way. Caldwell moved back to the desk and picked up his personal phone. And Mitchell, I need you to understand something. What we found in that filing cabinet, what you found in those access logs, Harrington has very good lawyers. The moment they find out we're looking at him, things are going to get complicated very fast. Whoever we talk to from here forward has to be someone we trust completely. Understood, Ryan said. Caldwell held his gaze. Do you trust me? It was a blunt question, and it deserved a blunt answer. Ryan thought about the past 3 years. About the times Caldwell had backed him up and the times he hadn't. About yesterday morning when Caldwell had put Jack Lawson in handcuffs without enough evidence. And about this morning when he had sat in this office and said plainly that Ryan had been right to pull the thread. I do, Ryan said, but I'd trust you more if we move fast. Caldwell almost smiled. It was a small, tight, humorless thing, but it was real. Then let's move fast. He was already dialing. Jack found out about the shell companies at 2:15 in the afternoon when Grace called him from her car and gave him the condensed version in under 4 minutes because she was already on her way to the county attorney's office and did not have time for a longer conversation. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, how long was he planning this? Based on the geological survey filing, at least 8 months, Grace said. But Ryan thinks the HVAC contractor access code was arranged even before that. If he planned the storage facility angle from the beginning, we could be looking at a year or more of preparation. A year, Jack turned that number over in his head. A year of Victor Harrington sitting in an office somewhere looking at a piece of paper that told him what was under Jack's land, deciding that the man who owned it was an obstacle to be removed, and then methodically building the machine that would remove him, while Jack was getting up at 5 every morning to measure out Emily's medication. While Jack was fixing trucks for neighbors and delivering supplies and doing what a person does when they are simply trying to live their life with integrity. Someone had been building a trap around him. Jack, Grace said, and her voice pulled him back. I need you to stay at the ranch today. You don't go into town. Don't take calls from numbers you don't recognize. And if anyone from Harrington's office contacts you, lawyer assistant, anyone, you say one thing, call my attorney. Nothing else. Understood, he said. How's Emily? He looked across the room at his daughter, who had moved from the kitchen table to the couch and was asleep with her legal pad still in her hand. Her face relaxed in a way it wasn't when she was awake and fighting. She found the lot number discrepancy, he said quietly. A brief silence from Grace. Then I know she may have saved this case. I'll tell her that. Tell her tonight, Grace said. We'll all celebrate properly when this is done. Right now I have a meeting. She hung up. Jack set the phone down. He looked at Emily sleeping on the couch. He looked at the legal pad in her hand with her careful handwriting covering the top 3 pages. He thought about Harrington sitting in an office, looking at a geological survey, deciding that a man and his sick daughter were an acceptable casualty of profit. He thought about what it felt like to have handcuffs put on you in front of your child. He thought about the 48 hours he had just lived through. And then because he was Jack Lawson and this was how he functioned, he pushed all of it to one side and focused on what needed to happen next. He called Darnell. The call lasted 6 minutes. By the end of it, Darnell had 3 specific tasks and a deadline, and he confirmed all of them in the flat, efficient tone of a man who takes assignments seriously and does not require further motivation. The first task was documentation. Every member of the Brotherhood who had helped Jack over the past 3 years, fixed a roof, hauled supplies, sat with a neighbor through a hard night, needed to write it down. Not for sentiment, for record, because Grace had told Jack that character witnesses were going to matter in what came next, and the most powerful character witnesses were not people who said kind things in a courtroom. They were people who could describe specific dates, specific actions, specific moments when Jack Lawson had shown up for someone who needed help. The second task was harder. Darnell needed to quietly find out whether any other property owners in Red Valley County had received offers from Harrington Development in the past 18 months. Not public record searches, those could be traced. Conversations, phone calls, neighbor talking to neighbor the way people do in small towns when they want to know what's happening without making it official. The third task was the hardest, and Darnell understood its weight before Jack finished saying it. There was a woman named Sandra at the county clerk's office who had been at the October auction and remembered Jack being there. Darnell needed to reach her before anyone else did, not to pressure her, not to convince her of anything, just to let her know that what she remembered might matter and to ask if she was willing to put it in writing. "You think Harrington's people are already moving," Darnell said. "I think Harrington's people have been moving this whole time," Jack said. "I was just too focused on staying ahead of Emily's appointments to notice the ground moving under me." Darnell was quiet for a beat. "That's not on you." "I know whose fault it is," Jack said, "but it's on me to fix it." "Not just on you," Darnell said, and there was something in his voice, not emphatic, just certain the way he said everything that landed in Jack's chest and stayed there. "I know," Jack said. "I know that, thank you." "Don't thank me. You'd do it for any of us." "I would." "Then stop thanking me and let me make some calls." Jack almost smiled for the first time in 2 days. "Go make your calls." Victor Harrington found out that something had changed at 3:45 p.m. He did not find out from the sheriff's department. He found out from a man named Lewis Pratt, who was Harrington's personal assistant, and whose primary qualification for the job was that he knew how to monitor things. Property records, local news feeds, county filing systems, the kind of quiet digital landscape that most people don't think about, but that tells a careful observer a great deal about what is happening before it becomes public. Lewis knocked on the door of Harrington's private office and came in without being asked, which was the signal they had established for information that could not wait. Harrington looked up from his desk. Lewis said, "The auction house was called this morning by the Red Valley Sheriff's Department." The room shifted. Harrington set down the pen he was holding. "Which deputy?" "Mitchell, Ryan Mitchell." He called their property manager and asked about specific auction lots. Harrington was quiet for a moment. His face, which was the face of a man who had spent 60 years learning to show only what he chose to show, gave nothing away. But his right hand moved to the pen he had just set down, and he picked it up again and held it in a way that was not about writing. "What lots?" he said. "I don't have the specifics yet." "Get them." "Yes, sir." Lewis paused. "There's something else." Harrington looked at him. "The bail hearing this morning, Lawson's attorney introduced documentation that the arresting charge may have been based on incorrect serial numbers." The pause that followed was very short, but it was the kind of short pause that contains a great deal. The judge accepted this. The charges weren't dropped, but bail was set, and the judge indicated she expected full evidence disclosure to the defense within 24 hours. Lewis looked at his employer with the careful neutrality of a man who has learned over years not to be the face attached to bad news. "The prosecution didn't oppose bail, sir." Harrington stood. He walked to the window. The big one, the one with the view of the mountains he had been looking at from this office for 15 years, while he built his company and his portfolio and his particular vision of what Red Valley could be if the right people owned the right pieces of it. "Call Weston," he said. Weston was his lead attorney. "Tell him I need him here in 2 hours. He's in Missoula." 2 hours, Lewis. Lewis left the room. Harrington stood in the window and looked at the mountains and did what he always did when a plan developed. Friction, he ran the problem from the beginning. Identified and what couldn't. Decided which parts could be defended and which parts needed to disappear before they became someone else's evidence. The HVAC contractor. That was the thread. He had known from the moment he designed that part of the plan that it was the thinnest piece, the access code, the late-night entry, the missing equipment that should have seemed like a storage error, rather than a deliberate removal. He had counted on the serial number connection not being checked until after Jack was already in enough legal trouble that his credibility was damaged. He had not counted on a deputy who pulled filing cabinet documents during a property search. He had not counted on that deputy being thorough. He looked at his reflection in the window. A 61-year-old man in a very good suit with the face of someone who had always found a way to get what he needed. He needed to find a way now. He picked up his own phone and made a call that was not to his attorney. Ryan did not go home at 5 o'clock. He stayed at his desk and kept working because the thing about a case that is moving is that it rewards the person who keeps moving with it. He had the access logs, he had the shell company filings, he had the geological survey. What he needed now was the connective tissue, the proof that the man whose name was on Harrington Development was the same man whose money had set up those shells. I was working through business filing records, cross-referencing signatures, and register agent information when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He looked at the text. It said, "You should stop where you are. This is bigger than you know, and it will not go well for you." Ryan looked at the text for a moment. Then he took a photograph of his phone screen with his personal camera, wrote the timestamp in his notebook, and forwarded the screenshot to Grace Allard with a single line just received. Keeping all records. He put his phone back down and kept working. 3 minutes later, Grace texted back, "Good. That's evidence. Do not respond to the number. Tell Caldwell." He told Caldwell. Caldwell looked at the screenshot, and his expression did the thing Ryan had observed earlier, that it controlled burn underneath the surface calm. He handed the phone back. "Obstruction of justice," he said quietly. "Add it to the file." Ryan added it to the file, son. At 5:30, something happened that none of them had planned for. Tom Garrett walked into the Red Valley Sheriff's Department. Tom was 63 years old, owned a feed store on the south side of town, and had been a fixture of Red Valley for as long as anyone could remember. He was not the kind of man who came to the Sheriff's Department voluntarily and without obvious reason. So when he appeared at the front desk and asked to speak to whoever was handling the Lawson case, the front desk officer went to get Ryan immediately. Ryan came out, introduced himself, and walked Tom to a quiet room. Tom sat down and put both hands on the table in the manner of someone who has decided to say something difficult and wants there to be no ambiguity about the fact that he has decided. "I heard Jack got arrested," Tom said. "Mr. Lawson is out on bail," Ryan said carefully. Tom nodded. "I want to tell you something, and I want it on record." "I'm listening." Tom looked at him steadily. 6 months ago, a man came to see me, came to my store after closing, which I thought was strange, said he represented a development company and that he was interested in purchasing my property, the store, and the 2 acres behind it. He paused. I told him I wasn't selling. He was polite about it. He left. Do you remember the man's name? He gave me a card. I still have it. Tom reached into his shirt pocket and set the card on the table. He came back 3 months later. This time he was less polite. He told me that the area was going to be developed regardless of what I decided, and that I'd be better off taking what they were offering than dealing with what happened to people who didn't cooperate. Ryan looked at the card on the table. He did not touch it yet. Those were his words, Ryan said. Better off than dealing with what happened to people who didn't cooperate. Those were his words, Tom said. I told him to get out of my store. He left. Tom paused. Then 2 weeks later, my business license renewal got held up for the first time in 22 years. Some kind of administrative error they couldn't explain. Cost me 6 weeks and $1,200 in legal fees to sort out. The room was very quiet. Mr. Garrett, Ryan said slowly, the man on this card, did he ever mention Jack Lawson? Tom looked at him. He said there were other property owners who were already cooperating. He didn't use Jack's name, but our properties are adjacent. He held Ryan's gaze. I've known Jack Lawson for 30 years. That man doesn't steal. He's fixed half the trucks in this county for free. And when my wife got sick 2 years ago and I couldn't make a delivery run, Jack drove 200 miles a round trip with my order himself without being asked. He just showed up. Tom's jaw tightened. So when I heard he got arrested for stolen equipment found on his property, I sat with it for a day, and then I decided I had to come in. Ryan picked up the business card. It did not say Harrington Development on it. It said Meridian Property Consultants with the same billings address, a third shell. Ryan set the card down and looked at Tom Garrett and felt something clarify in the case that had not been clear before. Not the evidence exactly, but the scope. The extent of what Harrington had built. The number of people he had reached out to, pressured, threatened. The administrative obstruction used as a quiet tool against anyone who said no. Tom Garrett was not the only one who had said no. He might just be the first to walk through the door. Mr. Garrett, Ryan said, I'm going to need you to give me a full written statement. Is that something you're willing to do? That's why I came in, Tom said simply. By 7 that evening, 2 more people had called the sheriff's department. Margaret Hollis, who ran a small horse boarding operation north of town, said a man from a property company had visited her property 4 months ago and implied that a recent zoning complaint against her facility's a complaint she had never been able to identify the source of might be easier to resolve if she were willing to discuss selling. Dale Wicker, a retired school teacher who owned 15 acres on the east side of Red Valley, said he had received 3 written offers over 6 months, each one larger than the last, and that after he declined the third one, his property tax assessment had been reviewed and revised upward for the first time in 8 years. 3 people, 3 different approaches, 3 different pressure points, but all 3 connected by the same pattern. A development company reaches out, a person says no, and then something goes wrong, something institutional, something official, something that looks like bureaucratic bad luck. But that arrives with suspicious precision right after the refusal. Ryan spread the statements across the conference room table and looked at them. This was not a man trying to buy land. This was a systematic campaign to acquire specific properties through targeted pressure using official systems, licensing boards, tax assessors, zoning complaints as instruments of coercion. And when those instruments weren't enough, moving to something more serious, moving to setting up a man with a criminal record, moving to destroying a father's reputation so he would be financially and legally desperate enough to sell. Ryan took photographs of everything on the table. He uploaded them to a secure folder that Grace had set up outside the county system. He sent her a message, 3 more witnesses. Same pattern, administrative pressure after refusals, different shell company name on the contact card. This is bigger than the Lawson case. Grace responded in under 2 minutes, I know. I'm with the county attorney right now. Keep the statements. Don't let them leave the building without signing. Jack did not sleep much that night. He sat in the kitchen after Emily went to bed, and he thought. Not anxiously, he was past anxiety, which had been replaced by something more purposeful. He thought about what Grace had told him, what Darnell had found, what Ryan Mitchell was apparently building on his side of this. He thought about Victor Harrington sitting in his office, with his view of the mountains making calculations about people like they were entries in a ledger. I thought about Sandra at the county clerk's office, who had been at that auction and remembered. He thought about Tom Garrett, who he didn't yet know had walked into the sheriff's department, but whose face he could picture clearly. The feed store, the easy handshake, the man who had shown up at Jack's barn door on a freezing February morning 3 years ago with a crate of engine oil and said simply, heard you were running low. He thought about how communities work. Not the idealized version, the real version. The way that people in a small town accumulate quiet history with each other. Favors given and received without keeping score. Trust built through repetition rather than declaration. The knowledge of who shows up when it matters, developed over years of watching who shows up when it matters. Harrington had looked at a piece of geological survey paper and seen a resource. He had looked at the people on top of that resource and seen obstacles. He had not understood, had fundamentally, completely failed to understand that an obstacle in a community are different things. That you can remove one-man frame, one-man damage, one man's reputation with the quiet, efficient machinery of institutional pressure and anonymous tips. But you cannot remove what that man represents to the people who have watched him live his life. You cannot anonymous tip away 30 years of showing up. Jack knew this the way he knew the hills above his ranch. Not because someone had told him, because he had lived it. He got up from the kitchen table at midnight. He checked on Emily, sleeping, her breathing steady, the medication doing what it was supposed to do. He stood in her doorway for a moment and just looked at her the way parents look at sleeping children, even when those children are fully grown, because that particular impulse does not diminish with time. Then he went back to the kitchen, made himself a cup of coffee, and sat down to write. Not a statement. And not for lawyers or courts or depositions. Just writing the kind of private accounting that some people do when they need to make something real by putting it on paper. He wrote, what I know is true. He underlined it. Then he wrote, I bought that equipment legally. I have the receipts and the photographs and the county official's signature and my own clear conscience. He wrote, someone tried to take everything I have by making me look like what they assumed I was. He wrote, they were wrong about what I am. He wrote, they are going to find out how wrong. He capped the pen, he folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket in the same place where he kept Emily's photograph. He finished his coffee. He was ready for what came next. The next morning arrived with the phone call at 6:58 a.m. It was Darnell. Sandra signed, Darnell said without saying hello. Jack closed his eyes for 1 second. She'll give a full statement, Darnell continued. She was at the auction. She has her own records from that day. The county clerk keeps independent logs of each auction transaction. She has Jack's lot in her records as legally transferred. Complete and clean. How did she seem, Jack said. Nervous, but solid. She said, Darnell paused, and when he continued, his voice had a quality Jack didn't often hear in it. Something that sat between satisfaction and something more personal. She said she's been keeping an eye on Harrington's acquisition patterns for 2 years. She's seen properties transfer at unusual speeds after owners get into legal or regulatory trouble. She never had enough to say anything about it officially. A pause. She said this case might be the one that finally gives her that chance. Jack was quiet for a moment. How many properties, he said. She said she'd counted 11 in the past 3 years, where the owner hit some kind of official trouble before the property transferred to a Harrington-connected entity. 11, not one frame up, not 2, 11 properties. 11 people who had encountered the same quiet institutional machinery of pressure and manipulation, and who had each in their own way found the path of least resistance and let go. Jack had not let go. And because he had not let go, because he had raised his hands in the cold morning air and told the sheriff that if anything happened to his daughter, the responsibility was on him because he had done that instead of running, instead of collapsing, instead of taking the path. The plan depended on him taking the whole machine had stayed in motion long enough for Ryan Mitchell to pull a filing cabinet and find receipts that didn't match. Sometimes the right thing to do is simply to not give up. Even when giving up would be so much easier. Even when you are exhausted and scared and someone has just put handcuffs on you in front of your child. Even then. Darnell, Jack said, yeah. Tell Sandra thank you. I will. And Darnell. I know, Darnell said before Jack could say the rest. I know. Grace Allard walked into the county attorney's office at 8 o'clock sharp with 3 binders, 2 USB drives, Tom Garrett's signed statement, the statements from Margaret Hollis and Dale Wicker, Ryan Mitchell's documented evidence package, Gerald Pruitt's access log file, the Shell Company filings, and the geological survey filed under MDR Property Solutions on Jack Lawson's property without Jack Lawson's knowledge or consent. The county attorney's name was Patricia Webb. She was 53 years old, had been doing this job for 8 years, and was widely considered one of the most rigorous legal minds in the county. She had not become that by being easily impressed. She looked at Grace's materials for 45 minutes without saying much. When she looked up, she said, how many victims are you documenting? 3 confirmed witnesses with signed statements, Grace said. Sandra Kelly at the county clerk's office believes there may be up to 11 properties. We're still gathering. Patricia Webb looked at the Shell Company filings. She looked at the geological survey. She looked at the access log showing the expired contractor code used at 11:47 p.m. This isn't county jurisdiction, she said. This is federal. I know, Grace said. I'm going to need to make a call. I expected that, Grace said. It's going to take a day, maybe 2. There are protocols. Patricia, Grace's voice was steady and direct. Jack Lawson's ranch is the primary evidence site. If Harrington realizes how far this investigation has moved, the question becomes whether the evidence is still there in 2 days. Patricia looked at her. I need a preservation order on the Lawson property and a freeze on any property transactions involving Harrington development entities in Red Valley County, Grace said. Today, before Weston gets his client's paperwork in order and starts filing motions to complicate this. Patricia Webb looked at the binders on her desk. She looked at the name MDR Property Solutions on the geological survey. She looked at the access log timestamp, 11:47 p.m. She picked up her phone. Get me Judge Holt, she said to her assistant through the intercom. Personal line, it's urgent. Grace sat back. Outside, Red Valley was going about its morning. People were opening stores and starting trucks and drinking coffee without knowing that in a county attorney's office, in a sheriff's department, in a filing cabinet, in a clean Montana barn, the careful architecture of a year-long plan was finally irrevocably beginning to come apart. And the man it had been designed to destroy was sitting at his kitchen table, drinking his second cup of coffee, listening to his daughter move around in the hallway and feeling for the first time in 3 days, something that was not quite peace but was the thing that precedes it. The thing that comes when you know the truth is moving, and you know it cannot be stopped. Judge Holt signed the preservation order at 9:47 a.m. Grace got the call from Patricia Webb at 9:51 and was in her car and on the phone to Ryan Mitchell before the courthouse door closed behind her. The order covered the loss in property, froze any property transactions connected to Harrington development entities in Red Valley County, and the part that made Grace's chest tighten with something close to relief, authorized a formal review of all regulatory and licensing actions taken against Red Valley property owners in the past 3 years, where the complainant could not be publicly identified. That last clause was Sandra Kelly's contribution. Patricia Webb had added it after a 15-minute phone call with the county clerk, and it was the kind of legal language that looked procedural on the surface, but was in practice a crowbar aimed directly at the machinery Harrington had been running. Ryan received the call while he was at his desk, already on his third coffee, already deep in the business registry cross-referencing he had started before sunrise. He listened to Grace's summary, wrote down the key points, and then sat for a moment looking at the preservation order number she had read him. "He's going to know," Ryan said. "He already suspects," Grace said. "Lewis Pratt has been pulling county records since yesterday afternoon. He's not subtle about it." "How do you know that?" "Sandra told me. She noticed the access pattern on the county filing system yesterday evening. Someone was pulling everything related to auction lot records, property transaction, histories, and regulatory complaint filings, all in the same session, all from an IP address registered to an office building in Billings." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "He's trying to see how much we have. He's trying to see what we know before his lawyer tells him what to do," Grace said, "which means we have a window and it is closing. Ryan, I need you to do something for me." "Name it." "The threatening text you received last night. Already documented. I need it flagged formally in the evidence file, and I need you to talk to Caldwell about getting the number traced. Prepaid phones are difficult, but the carrier still has tower ping data. If that phone was used anywhere near Harrington's properties in the 12 hours before you received the text, it is corroborating evidence of witness intimidation. I'll talk to Caldwell in 20 minutes. "Good." A pause. "And Ryan, thank you for all of it." I wasn't someone who accepted that kind of thing gracefully, so he just said, "Let me know when you need something else," and ended the call. He went to find Caldwell. Caldwell was already in the conference room when Ryan got there, and he was not alone. Sitting across from him was a woman Ryan had never seen before, late 40s, compact with the kind of efficient stillness that certain people develop when their job requires them to sit in rooms and pay very close attention. She had a federal ID badge clipped to her jacket and a legal pad on the table and a coffee she had not touched. Caldwell looked at Ryan when he came through the door. "Good timing. Ryan Mitchell, this is Special Agent Diana Foss. She's with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit out of Helena." Ryan sat down. Diana Foss looked at him with the direct assessing quality of someone who evaluates people quickly and accurately and does not waste time being indirect about it. "Deputy Mitchell, I understand you're the one who identified the serial number discrepancy that opened this case." "Yes, ma'am." "Walk me through it. Everything from the moment you entered the property yesterday morning." Ryan walked her through it. All of it, from the filing cabinet in the barn to the auction house, called to the access logs to the shell company filings, to the geological survey, to the threatening text. He did it in order without editorializing with the same clean precision he had used when he organized his notes. It took 11 minutes. Diana Foss had not written anything on her legal pad. When Ryan finished, she picked up her pen for the first time and wrote one word. Ryan couldn't see it from across the table, but the deliberateness of it, the single word after 11 minutes of listening, told him something about how she processed information. "How long has Harrington Development been operating in this county?" she said. "Formally about 6 years, Ryan said. But the first geological survey we found was filed 8 months ago. Before that, the purchase offers looked like standard development interest. And after the survey, the offers got significantly larger, and the pressure on people who refused got significantly more systematic." Diana looked at Caldwell. You said 11 properties. Sandra Kelly at the county clerk's office identified 11 transfers where the previous owner encountered regulatory or legal issues in the period before the transfer, Caldwell said. We haven't confirmed whether all of them are connected to Harrington yet, but the pattern is consistent. Consistent, Diana repeated with a tone that suggested the word did not begin to cover it. She looked back at Ryan. The threatening text. I have it documented. I was about to ask Sheriff Caldwell about tracing the carrier data. Don't. She said it quickly, not harshly. That trace needs to go through us. If it goes through the county system and Harrington's attorney finds out about it before we're ready, they'll file a motion to suppress on procedural grounds and we'll lose 2 weeks. She looked at him steadily. Can you give me the number right now? Ryan read it to her from his notebook. She wrote it down. I'm going to need copies of everything you have, she said. Mouth through the county system through me directly. I'm going to give you a secure upload address, and I need everything on it by end of day. Understood, Ryan said. Dinah Foss stood. She picked up her legal pad, capped her pen, and picked up her untouched coffee for the first time. She looked at Caldwell. Sheriff, the preservation order your county attorney filed this morning is good, but I'm going to need you to coordinate with me before any additional warrants are executed. If we move too early or in the wrong sequence, we tip him off and the shell companies start dissolving. She paused. This is not a county case anymore. It has federal dimensions that require federal sequencing. Are we aligned on that? Caldwell looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who is being asked to cede jurisdiction over something that started in his town on his watch and that he feels personally responsible for. Ryan could see him working through it. We're aligned, Caldwell said. Good. Diana looked at Ryan one more time. You did good work, Deputy. Fast and careful. Both matter. She walked out. The room was quiet for a moment. FBI, Ryan said. Patricia Webb made a call last night, Caldwell said. Apparently the pattern Sandra identified 11 properties. Systematic regulatory pressure shell companies. That's not the first time this has come across federal radar. There's a case in Wyoming, a similar pattern with a different developer who turned out to be connected to Harrington through a holding company. He paused. We didn't stumble onto a local land grab, Mitchell. We stumbled on to the edge of something considerably larger. Ryan absorbed that. Does Jack know? He said. Caldwell shook his head. Grace Allard knows. She's coordinating with Webb. Jack, he paused. Jack needs to know today. I think that should come from us. Ryan looked at him. You want to go out there? I think I owe him a conversation, Caldwell said. It was not said with drama or performance. Just stated flat and direct the way a man states a thing he has decided is true and is not going to argue about. Ryan nodded. I'll drive. They arrived at the ranch at 11:15. Jack opened the door before they reached the porch. He had heard the car on the gravel, the way people who live in rural places hear everything that approaches. And he had been in the barn when they pulled in, and he came out wiping his hands on a shop rag with the careful, deliberate walk of a man who is controlling his pace because he does not yet know whether the news coming toward him is good or bad. He looked at Caldwell. Caldwell looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Jack said, come inside. Emily was at the kitchen table with her laptop and her legal pad, because apparently that was simply where Emily lived now. And she looked up when Caldwell walked in with an expression that was not quite hostile, but was the expression of someone who has not forgotten the image of her father in handcuffs and is not going to pretend that image doesn't exist. Caldwell saw the expression. He did not look away from it. Miss Lawson, he said, I owe you and your father an apology. I'd like to start there if that's all right. Emily said nothing. She just looked at him with those dark eyes that were Jack's eyes waiting. Caldwell sat down at the kitchen table without being asked. Ryan stood near the door. Jack sat across from Caldwell and folded his hands on the table and waited the same way Emily was waiting, without rushing it, without filling the silence, letting the man find his own way to whatever he had come to say. I came to your property 2 mornings ago with a warrant based on an anonymous tip and circumstantial evidence, Caldwell said. I didn't look carefully enough at what I had before I acted on it. And he stopped, started again. I am aware that the reason I didn't look carefully enough is that I looked at your vest and I made assumptions that I should not have made. That is the truth, and I'm not going to dress it up as anything else. Jack held his gaze. He did not say anything. The charges against you are going to be formally dropped, Caldwell said. That process starts today. You'll hear from the prosecutor's office by tomorrow morning. He paused. There's more, and it's significant. I need you to hear it. Jack nodded once. Caldwell laid it out. The FBI, Diana Foss, the Wyoming connection, the 11 properties, the geological survey, the shell companies, and what they connected to and what that suggested about the scale of what Harrington had been doing, not just in Red Valley, but potentially across multiple counties and possibly across state lines. Jack listened to all of it without interrupting. Emily's pen had stopped moving on her legal pad halfway through. She was just listening. When Caldwell finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Jack looked at the table for a moment. Then he said 11 properties. That's what we have confirmed so far, Caldwell said. 11 families. Yes. Jack was quiet again. When he looked up, his expression was not what Caldwell had expected. It was not satisfaction. It was not relief, though the relief was there underneath. It was something more complicated than either the face of a man processing the full scope of a thing that was bigger than his own situation and feeling the weight of that scope land on him. The other people, Jack said, the ones who transferred their properties, do they know what was done to them? Caldwell glanced at Ryan. That's going to be part of the federal investigation. They deserve to know, Jack said. It was not an accusation. It was simply stated with the same flat certainty he used for everything that mattered to him. Whatever happens in courts and investigations, those people deserve to know that what happened to them wasn't bad luck. It was done to them deliberately. Caldwell was quiet for a moment. I agree with you, he said. Then make sure that happens, Jack said. Whatever else comes out of this, make sure the people who already lost their properties know the truth about how they lost them. Caldwell nodded. It was not a procedural nod. It was the nod of a man making a personal commitment. I will. Emily set her pen down. She looked at Caldwell with an expression that had shifted, not warm, not yet, but different. The expression of someone who is recalibrating. The geological survey, she said. What's under our land? Caldwell glanced at Ryan again. The survey results weren't filed publicly, Ryan said carefully. But based on the premium, Harrington was willing to pay significantly above market in increasing each time mineral rights experts we've contacted suggest it's likely rare earth elements. The kind of thing that makes land worth 10 to 20 times its surface value. Emily looked at her father. Jack looked back at her. Neither of them had known. Neither of them had had any idea that the ground their family had worked for 3 generations. The ground Jack's grandfather had bought and his father had kept, and Jack had refused to sell because it was sitting on top of something that a man in a suit had decided was worth destroying a family to obtain. Grandpa's land, Emily said quietly. Yeah, Jack said. He had no idea. No. Emily looked at the table. A muscle in her jaw moved. When she looked up again, her eyes were dry and her voice was level, but something in her face had the quality of a person who has been hit and has decided not to acknowledge it until later. Good, she said. Then they didn't get it. Victor Harrington found out about the federal presence at 12:30 p.m. He found out not from Lewis Pratt, who was still in Billings pulling records, but from his attorney Weston, who had sources in the county courthouse and had recognized Diana Foss's name the moment he heard it. The call lasted 4 minutes. Harrington listened more than he spoke, which was unusual for him, and when Weston finished laying out what he knew, Harrington said one thing. How contained is this? Weston's answer was 3 words. It is not. After the call ended, Harrington sat in his office for several minutes without doing anything. He looked at his desk. He looked at his hands. He looked at the geological survey printout he had kept in the top drawer of his desk for 8 months. The document that had started everything? The document that showed in clear technical language what was under 4,000 acres of Montana land owned by a man who kept refusing to sell. I thought about what he had built, not just the plan. The plan was only the most recent thing. He thought about what he had built over 15 years, the company, the portfolio, the reputation, the particular kind of unspoken authority that attaches itself to a man who has money and knows how to use it to make other people's problems go away or appear. He had been so certain that Jack Lawson was a problem that could be made to go away. He had been so certain that a man in a leather vest with a biker patch was someone that institutions and communities would abandon the moment he got into trouble. Someone that people would believe guilty before they looked at evidence, because the evidence of the patch was already there. And it already told a story that people wanted to believe. He had been wrong. Not just tactically wrong, wrong at the fundamental level, wrong about people, wrong about what a community actually was, wrong about what 30 years of showing up for your neighbors actually built, which was not just goodwill, but something structural, a kind of collective knowledge about who a man was, that no anonymous tip and no criminal charge and no leather vest could override. He had brought down everything he had on one man, and that one man had not broken. And in not breaking, he had become the stone that cracked the whole machinery Harrington had been running. Harrington picked up his phone. He called Weston back. "Get me in front of the federal agent before the end of the day," he said, proactively, before they come to me. Weston was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant step, Victor." "I know what it is," Harrington said. "Do it." Ryan Mitchell was at his desk at 1:45 p.m. when Grace called. Harrington's attorney reached out to Diana Foss, Grace said, 30 minutes ago, requesting a meeting. Ryan straightened in his chair. "He's going to try to negotiate. He's going to try to control the narrative before it controls him," Grace said, "which tells us something important." "He knows we have enough," Ryan said. "He knows we have enough," Grace confirmed. "Which means all the pieces we've been building, the lot numbers, the access logs, the shells, the geological survey, the witnesses he knows or his lawyers have told him, that when that gets laid out in front of a federal court, it is not defensible." She paused. "Ryan, I need you to understand something. What happens in the next 12 to 24 hours is going to shape the outcome of this case in ways that the weeks of courtroom proceedings afterward will not. If Harrington cooperates and cuts a deal among the people he hurt may get partial restitution. If he fights, the process drags out for years and the people who already lost their properties may get nothing." "Which do you want?" Ryan said. "I want Jack Lawson's charges formally dropped on record," Grace said. "I want it public and I want it today. Whatever deal Harrington makes with the federal government, it is between him and Diana Foss. But the wrongful arrest of my client is not a federal matter, and it does not get bundled into a negotiation. It gets resolved cleanly and publicly on its own terms." "I'll talk to Caldwell," Ryan said. "I already did," Grace said. "He's ahead of you." She hung up. Ryan put down the phone and looked at the wall for a moment. 3 days ago, he had been at a routine property search, looking at stolen equipment, thinking about lunch. Now he was in the middle of a federal investigation that touched multiple states, involved systematic fraud against more than a dozen families, and had started with one decision, one moment of pulling a filing cabinet and looking at receipts that didn't match. He thought about what Diana Foss had said, fast and careful. Both matter. He thought about Jack Lawson standing on his front porch with his hands raised already, saying what mattered most to him before they put the cuffs on. His daughter's appointment, his daughter's medication, a man whose mind went there first before legal defense, before personal safety, before anything. Ryan had a sister. She was 26 and healthy and lived in Spokane, and he had not called her in 3 weeks because life was busy and time moved the way it did. He made a mental note to call her tonight. Then he picked up his phone and called Caldwell. Caldwell announced the formal withdrawal of all charges against Jack Lawson at 2:30 p.m. He did it in the department's main room in front of the officers on shift, with a written statement that Ryan had helped him draft and that Caldwell read aloud without deviation. The statement was short. It did not use bureaucratic language. It did not hide behind procedural framing. It said, "This department arrested Jack Lawson on the morning of Tuesday last week based on evidence that has since been demonstrated to have been deliberately falsified and placed on Mr. Lawson's property by parties currently under federal investigation. The charges are formally withdrawn in full. Mr. Lawson is entitled to a full record expungement. This department made a serious error in proceeding to arrest without adequate verification of the evidence presented, and I accept full responsibility for that error as the commanding officer of this department." He read it to the end. Then he looked up. The room was quiet. "Questions," Caldwell said. One of the older deputies, a man named Frank Bauer, who had been with the department for 20 years and who Ryan had always considered a reasonable person, raised his hand. "The federal case. Are we supporting or are we stepping back?" "We are supporting," Caldwell said. "We have a witness list and evidence package, and a deputy who has done some of the most thorough preliminary work I have seen in this department in years. We are not stepping back. We are standing behind our part of this case, and we are making sure that every person who was affected by what Harrington's operation did in this county has access to what we found. Frank Bauer nodded, no other questions. Caldwell folded the statement and put it in his jacket pocket. Back to work, he said. The room moved. Jim. Grace called Jack at 2:47. It's done, she said. Formal withdrawal on the record with Caldwell's statement. Your name is clear. Jack was in the barn when the call came. He was doing what he always did when he needed to think, working with his hands, because his hands knew what to do, even when his head was still sorting itself out. He had been replacing a worn brake cable on a neighbor's motorcycle, a job he had promised to do 2 weeks ago, and that the arrest had interrupted. And he set the pliers down on the workbench. Okay, he said. Grace laughed, a short, genuine laugh, the kind you don't plan. That's it, okay? What do you want me to say? I don't know. Something more than okay. You've been fighting for 3 days. I've been waiting for 3 days, Jack corrected her gently. You and Ryan and Patricia Webb and Darnell and Emily and Sandra Kelly and Tom Garrett and Margaret Hollis and Dale Wicker, you've been fighting. I've been waiting for the truth to reach the right people. A pause. Jack, Grace said, and her voice had changed into something quieter, the voice she probably used outside of courtrooms and conference rooms. For what it's worth, in 20 years of practicing law, I have not worked a case where a man under that kind of pressure held together the way you did. Most people fall apart. Most people get angry and say things that complicate their defense. You were, she seemed to be choosing the word, deliberate. You were completely deliberate. Jack looked at the brake cable in his hands. I had Emily to think about, he said simply. I know. When you have something to think about that matters more than your own fear, the fear gets smaller, he said. It doesn't go away. It just stops being the biggest thing in the room. Grace was quiet for a moment. I'm going to remember that, she said. You can have it for free. She laughed again. I'll talk to you tomorrow. There's still federal process ahead, and you'll be called as a witness in what comes next. But for today, go be with your daughter. That's the plan, he said. He ended the call. He stood in the barn for a moment with his phone in his hand and the brake cable on the workbench, and the ordinary smell of oil and metal, and the particular quality of afternoon light that comes through old barn boards. I thought about his grandfather building this place, his father keeping it, himself refusing again and again to let it go, not because of stubbornness, not because of the mineral survey he hadn't even known about, but because some things are not about money. And the only way to communicate that to a man who believes everything is about money is to keep saying no until he understands that you mean it. He put his phone in his pocket. He picked up the pliers. He finished the brake cable. Emily was waiting for him when he came in from the barn. She was standing in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a person who already knows what happened and is deciding how to be about it. She handed him a cup when he reached the counter. He took it, looked at her. Grace called you too. She texted me, Emily said. 3 words, all charges dropped. He nodded. She looked at him for a moment with those clear, dark eyes. Then she said, how are you actually doing? Right now I'm fine. Dad. She tilted her head. I found you awake at midnight writing in the kitchen. He had not known she had seen that. He thought she was asleep. Of course she had seen it. She missed very little. I was processing, he said. Were you scared? I thought about lying. He thought about the version of himself that always said, fine, always said, I'll handle it, always redirected toward her well-being before his own. He thought about how that version of himself had served a purpose and also had a cost. Yes, he said, not for me, for you. The thing I was most scared of the whole time was you having an episode and not being able to get to you. Emily looked at him. She set her coffee cup down. She crossed the kitchen and put her arms around him the way she rarely did, not because she didn't feel it, but because she was his daughter and she had inherited his tendency to communicate through action rather than gesture. He held on. They stayed that way for a moment that neither of them would have been able to put into words if anyone had asked, which was fine, because some moments are not for words. Then Emily said into his shoulder, I called Mrs. Pemberton that morning. I figured, and I took my medication. I know, and I made it to the doctor's appointment. I know that too. She pulled back and looked at him. I can do more than you think I can. I know that, he said. I've always known that. He stopped. I just want to be there, that's all. Not because you can't handle things, because I want to be there. She looked at him for one long moment. Then she picked up her coffee cup, turned back to the counter, and said with her back to him, but with a particular quality in her voice that was as close as she got to vulnerable in the open air. I know, Dad, I know. The town found out about the charges being dropped that evening. Not through an official press release, though one was filed. Through the way small towns find out about things, conversation moving from person to person with the organic speed of something that people genuinely want to know. Tom Garrett told 3 customers at the feed store. Margaret Hollis called 2 neighbors. The front desk officer at the sheriff's department mentioned it to someone's wife, who called her book club. By 7 p.m., the version of Jack Lawson that had been circulating for 3 days, the Hells Angels biker finally caught the dangerous man whose true colors had shown, had started to be replaced by something more complicated, more true, and considerably more uncomfortable for the people who had believed the first version too quickly. Some of them felt that discomfort and pushed it away. Some of them felt it and sat with it. And a few of them, the ones who had known Jack the longest, who had accepted his help and then whispered about him 2 days ago, and now had to live with having done that, felt it so acutely that they needed to do something with it. Jack's phone started ringing at 7:30. He didn't answer most of the calls. He listened to the messages. Some of them were awkward. Some were direct. Some people apologized without quite saying what they were apologizing for, which was its own kind of honesty about how hard the actual words were. One message was from a woman named Carolyn Mead, who ran the flower shop on Main Street and who Jack had helped when her delivery van broke down 2 winters ago, standing in the cold for an hour to get it running. She said, I owe you an apology and I'm going to bring it to you in person tomorrow morning, and I'd like you to let me. Jack listened to that message twice. Then he put the phone face down on the counter and went to check on Emily. She was in her room already in bed, her legal pad on the nightstand, and her lamp still on in the way it always was when she was trying to wind down. He knocked on the doorframe. She looked up. How are your levels? He said. Good. Took the evening dose on time. Sleep well. Dad. She said it with the specific tone that meant she wanted to say something and was deciding how to say it. He waited. The things people said about you these past 3 days. Yeah. Does that bother you? I thought about it. Not the performance of thinking about it, but the actual consideration of the question, because she deserved the actual answer. It did, he said, for a minute. Then I thought about who actually showed up and who those people are, and it stopped bothering me. She looked at him. 21 guys in a courtroom. 21 guys in a courtroom, he agreed, and Ryan Mitchell pulling a filing cabinet. And you finding the lot number. She almost smiled. We're going to be okay, aren't we? He looked at his daughter in the lamplight with her legal pad and her clear eyes and the particular quality of strength she carried in her body, even as that body quietly waged war against itself every single day. We were always going to be okay, he said. We just had to get through the part where it didn't look like it yet. She nodded once. That was enough. He turned off the hallway light and let her sleep. At 9 p.m., Darnell called. Sandra Kelly got a call this afternoon, Darnell said without greeting. Jack's hand tightened on the phone. What kind of call? Someone who identified himself as an attorney representing Harrington Development. Said she might want to reconsider her statement, given that her position at the county clerk's office could be complicated by participation in what he called a politically motivated investigation. The kitchen went very quiet around Jack. She didn't reconsider, Darnell said. No. She recorded the call. A pause. Then she called Grace. Grace called the FBI. Diana Foss has the recording. Jack closed his eyes for 1 second. Witness? Tampering. Harrington had sent someone to pressure a county clerk who was a key witness in an active federal investigation, and that county clerk had been sharp enough or brave enough or both to turn her phone to record before she answered. Sandra Kelly, Jack said quietly. She said, and I'm quoting directly here, Darnell said, I have worked in this office for 19 years, and I have never once let anyone tell me what records mean. I am not starting today. Jack leaned against the counter and breathed out slowly. All day, the story had been moving. Evidence assembled, connections made, legal mechanisms engaged, federal attention secured. All day it had been the work of professionals, lawyers, investigators, law enforcement, federal agents doing what professionals do with the facts that had been laid in front of them. But underneath all of it, making all of it possible, were people like Sandra Kelly, who had simply decided not to be intimidated, who had carried the truth in their own modest, specific way and refused to put it down when someone told them to, who had picked up their phone and pressed record. "Tell her thank you," Jack said. "I already did," Darnell said. "She said the thank you goes to you. She said she's been watching what Harrington has been doing to properties in this county for 2 years, and she's been waiting for someone to not let go. She said you didn't let go." Jack said nothing for a moment. "I almost did," he said quietly. "There was a moment in that holding cell, maybe 3 or 4 hours in, where I thought about what it would cost to fight this versus what it would cost to not fight it. And I thought about Emily and the land and whether any of it was worth—" He stopped. "I thought about it." "But you didn't," Darnell said. "No, because of Emily." "Because of Emily," Jack agreed. "Because if I gave up the land to make the legal trouble go away, I'd be going home to tell her that the place her grandfather built and her father kept wasn't worth fighting for. And I couldn't—" His voice went flat for just a second, the way voices do when a real thing is right underneath the words. "I couldn't look at her and say that." Darnell was quiet. "You know what the patch means," Darnell finally said. "I know what it means. Not what people think it means, what it actually means." Jack looked at the leather vest hanging on the hook by the back door. The same hook it had hung on for 22 years, through every morning of every day he had lived on this land, through the good years and the hard ones, through Emily's childhood and her diagnosis and every 5 a.m. alarm that followed. "It means you don't ride alone," Jack said. "You were never alone in that cell," Darnell said. "You know that." "I know that," Jack said. "I knew it the whole time." They said goodnight. Jack hung up. He looked at the vest on the hook for one more moment. Then he turned off the kitchen light and went to bed for the first time in 3 days, feeling the particular, specific, hard-won weight of a man who has been through something real and he has come out the other side of it, still standing, still whole, still exactly himself. Outside, Red Valley was quiet. The hills were dark. And somewhere in Billings, in a hotel room where his attorney had told him not to go home tonight, Victor Harrington lay awake staring at a ceiling, finally beginning to understand the full cost of having built his plan on a lie about who Jack Lawson was. The federal indictment came down on a Thursday. Grace called Jack at 7:14 in the morning before he had finished measuring Emily's medication, and she did not waste time on preamble. Victor Harrington had been indicted on 11 federal counts: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit property fraud, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, that last one courtesy of Sandra Kelly and her phone recording, and a charge that Grace said the federal prosecutor had added the previous evening that made the whole case shift in weight and dimension. Racketeering, the pattern of conduct across multiple properties, multiple counties, multiple shell companies operating as an organized enterprise for financial gain through coercion and fraud. "Rico," Jack said. "Rico," Grace confirmed. Jack set the pill organizer down on the counter. He had heard that word before, in the way most people hear it attached to organized crime cases in other cities, other states, things that felt remote and cinematic and not related to a ranch in Red Valley, Montana. Now it was attached to a man who had spent a year building a machine designed to put Jack in handcuffs and take his grandfather's land. "What does that mean for the other property owners?" Jack said. "The 11. Federal prosecutors are reviewing each transfer," Grace said. "In cases where fraud is provable as a direct cause of the transfer, there are grounds for restitution and potentially for voiding the transactions. It won't be quick. Some of those people may get their land back. Some may get financial restitution. Some cases are complicated because the properties have already been developed or resold." A pause. "It's not a clean ending for everyone." "No," Jack said. "I didn't think it would be. But it's an ending that has accountability in it. That's not nothing." "No," he said again. "That's not nothing." He heard Emily moving down the hallway toward the kitchen. The particular cadence of her walk, the way she favored her right side on mornings when the stiffness was bad, which he could identify from the sound alone after 3 years of paying close attention. He picked the pill organizer back up. "Grace," he said, "thank you for all of it, every hour." "Jack," her voice had the warmth in it that she usually kept professional distance from. "This one mattered. You know that." He did know that. He said goodbye and put the phone in his pocket and had the medication and the water glass ready when Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at his face. "Indicted," she said. "It was not a question." 11 counts, Jack said. Emily took the medication from his hand. She swallowed it, drank the water, set the glass down. She stood there for a moment, looking at nothing in particular, her jaw working slightly the way it did when she was processing something she hadn't fully decided how to feel about yet. Then she said, "Good." Just that one word, good. Not triumphant, not relieved, not performative. Just the quiet, final bone-deep satisfaction of a person who has watched something wrong, stay wrong for too long, and is now watching it begin to be made right. Jack understood completely. The community meeting happened 4 days later. It had not been Jack's idea. It had been Caldwell's, which surprised people, including Jack, who had not fully predicted the direction the sheriff would move once the federal case was in motion. But Caldwell had called the Red Valley Community Center and reserved the main hall and sent word through the department and through Tom Garrett's feed store and through every other informal channel a small town has, and by 7 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, the room held more than 100 people. Jack came with Emily and Darnell. He had not planned a speech. He did not intend to give one, but he sat in the second row and he listened to what happened, and what happened was something he had not fully allowed himself to expect because he had spent so many years being the person in the leather vest that people looked at sideways, and certain expectations become so embedded that you stop questioning them even when the evidence is right in front of you. Caldwell spoke first. He stood at the front of that room and he said the things that were in his written statement, and then he said something that was not in any official statement, something that came from a different place. "I have been sheriff of this county for 14 years, Caldwell said. "In those 14 years, I have made decisions I was proud of and decisions I was not proud of. But I have not until last week made a decision that required me to look at a person who had done nothing wrong and acknowledge publicly that I acted on assumption rather than evidence. That is what I am doing now." He looked out at the room. "Jack Lawson has lived in this county for 52 years. He has fixed your trucks, hauled your supplies, sat with your families in hard times, and asked for nothing in return. He did all of that while raising a daughter on his own and managing a property that 3 generations of his family built. And when I arrived at his door with deputies and handcuffs, the first thing he said to me was not about himself. It was about his daughter, about making sure she got to her doctor's appointment." Caldwell paused. "I want you to think about what that tells you about the man." The room was very quiet. Jack looked at the floor in front of him. He could feel Emily's hand near his on the armrest between them, not touching, just close. He did not look up because the moment was real and he didn't want to perform it. Caldwell finished. He thanked the room and sat down. Tom Garrett stood up without being called on. He said 3 minutes worth of honest things about Jack and about what Harrington's operation had done to the commercial properties on the south side of town, and about the zoning complaint that had cost him 6 weeks and $1,200. He said it plainly the way Tom Garrett did everything. Margaret Hollis stood up after him. Then Dale Wicker. Then a man Jack barely knew, a younger man named Paul Reeves, who owned a small construction business and whom Jack had helped exactly once 2 years ago, when Paul's equipment trailer had thrown a wheel on the highway north of town, and Jack had pulled over without being asked and stayed for 2 hours until it was fixed. Paul stood up and said, "I want to say something about what it's like to have someone pull over for you when you're stuck on the side of the road. Not someone you called, not someone who owed you anything, just a man in a leather vest who saw a problem and stopped." He looked at Jack. "I didn't know you well enough to stand up for you last week when I heard the news. I'm standing up for you now because I should have done it then, and I'd like to start making that right." Jack looked up. He looked at Paul Reeves, this younger man with the honest face in the construction business and the 2 hours on the highway's shoulder, and he felt something move through him that he had not been prepared for. Not the big operatic wave of emotion that stories sometimes assign to moments like this. Something quieter and more specific. The recognition that he had spent 22 years doing things that he never expected to be witnessed, let alone acknowledged because he had done them, because they were right and not because he needed an audience. And here were witnesses, unasked for, unscripted, real. He nodded at Paul, once firmly. That was enough. Ryan Mitchell sat in the back of the room and watched it all and felt the strange particular feeling of someone who has been instrumental in a thing and yet is not quite part of it, adjacent to the story, rather than in it, which was exactly the position he wanted to occupy, and which he recognized without vanity as the correct position for what he did. He had done his job. He had done it carefully and thoroughly, and against some quiet institutional pressure to not look too hard at evidence that complicated a clean narrative. And the result was sitting in the second row of the community center in a leather vest with a daughter on one side and a brother on the other, receiving the kind of reckoning that a community owes a person it wronged imperfectly, but genuinely. Ryan thought about his own brother. He had called him the night Diana Foss walked out of the conference room. His brother had answered on the second ring, and they had talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular and everything important, the way brothers do when enough time has passed and enough has happened to make the ordinary conversation feel like the point rather than the prelude to it. After the meeting ended, people moved around the room in the organic way of communities, processing something together. Small conversations, handshakes, the quiet recalibration that happens when a shared narrative gets corrected. Ryan watched from the back. Jack moved through it with the same deliberateness he apparently brought to everything. He spoke to Tom Garrett for several minutes. He shook Paul Reeves' hand and said something that made Paul nod with the serious attention of a man receiving something he intends to carry. He made his way around the room slowly, not performing accessibility, but genuinely present to each exchange. Then Jack looked up across the room and found Ryan's face in the crowd. He crossed the room, directly moving through conversations without getting stopped until he was standing in front of Ryan with his hand extended. Ryan shook it. "I owe you a significant debt," Jack said. "You don't," Ryan said. "I was doing my job." "You were doing your job carefully," Jack said, "when the easier thing would have been to not look too hard. That's different." He held Ryan's gaze. "That matters to me. I want you to know that." Ryan accepted it this time. "It mattered to me too," he said. Jack nodded. He started to turn back toward the room. Then he stopped. "Your sister," he said, "in Spokane." Ryan stared at him. "How do you know I have a sister in Spokane?" Jack almost smiled, the full version of the almost smiles that had appeared a few times across the last week. "You said something to Darnell at the bail hearing. Darnell told me you looked like a man who had something personal in why he did the job right." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "She's healthy," he said, "but I've been better about calling." "Good," Jack said simply. He meant it as something more than a single word, and Ryan understood it as more than a single word. Then Jack turned back into the room. The twist that no one in that community center saw coming arrived 6 days later. It came in the form of a call to Grace Allard from the federal prosecutor's office, not about Harrington's case, which was proceeding through its own heavy machinery, but about the geological survey. About what specifically was under Jack Lawson's land. Grace drove to the ranch that Saturday morning. She sat down at the kitchen table across from Jack and Emily, and she put a single piece of paper on the table. "Rare earth elements," she said, "specifically a concentration of neodymium and dysprosium that the Federal Geological Assessment, which they conducted as part of the asset evaluation for the fraud case, describes as significant." Jack looked at the paper. "How significant?" Grace looked at him steadily. "The preliminary estimate of the mineral rights value is between $40 and $60 million. The kitchen went completely silent. Emily's hand stopped moving on her legal pad. She looked at the paper. She looked at Grace. She looked at her father. Jack looked at the paper for a long time. He looked at it the way you look at something when your brain is making very sure that the information is real before it allows itself to respond to it. $40 million. $60 million. Under the land his grandfather had bought for cattle and hard work and the simple intention of building something that would last. Under the ground where Emily had grown up and where Jack had gotten up at 5 a.m. every morning for 3 years to measure medication and make breakfast and be present for whatever the day needed him to be present for. Jack, Grace said carefully, "You own those mineral rights outright. The land hasn't transferred. The survey was conducted without your knowledge or consent, which actually strengthens your ownership claim because it establishes that Harrington knew the value and concealed it during the offers." She paused. "What you do with this, whether you develop the rights, whether you license them, whether you do nothing, is entirely your decision." Jack looked up from the paper. He looked at Emily. Emily was looking at him with an expression he recognized, not the controlled, composed face she showed the world, but the underneath one, the one that came out in early mornings before the day had fully begun. The face of a young woman who was thinking about her future and who until this moment had always understood her future to have a particular shape, defined in meaningful part by her medical costs, by what her father could manage, by the careful rationing of resources against need that they had both gotten very good at without discussing it. That shape had just changed. "Emily," Jack said. "I heard," she said. Her voice was steady, careful, the way it was when she was holding something large and making sure she had a secure grip before she let herself feel it. "What do you think of it?" he said. She looked at the paper. She looked at her father. She looked at the window toward the hills, the same hills she had grown up under, that had always been the background of whatever her life was and was becoming. "I think," she said slowly, "that we are not making any decisions today." Jack looked at her. "I think," she continued, "that we sleep on it, and then we sleep on it again. And then we talk to people who know more than we do about what these decisions actually mean in practice." She held his gaze. "And I think that whatever we decide it together. Not you deciding what's best for me. Together." Jack looked at his daughter. He felt in that moment the full and specific weight of 24 years of the father he had tried to be, in the places he had fallen short, in the places he had perhaps gotten something right. He felt the weight of 3 years of 5 a.m. alarms and medication schedules and doctor's appointments made by cab when he couldn't be there. He felt the weight of a week that had started with handcuffs on his porch and ended in a community center with 100 people bearing witness. He felt all of it, and he let himself feel it, which was not something he did often. "Together," he said. Emily picked up her pen. Grace quietly put the paper back in her briefcase and sat back and let them have the moment, because she understood what she was looking at. Not a legal transaction, not a mineral rights calculation, but a father and daughter deciding right in front of her what kind of people they were going to be, with something they hadn't expected and hadn't asked for. 3 months later, Jack Lawson was still getting up at 5 a.m. The medication was still measured into the organizer at 5:15. Breakfast was still made. The ranch still ran the way it had always run, which was to say by the accumulated habits of a man who knew what mattered and did it without requiring the world to acknowledge that he was doing it. Some things had changed. Victor Harrington had entered into a plea agreement with federal prosecutors, not the full 11 counts, but enough that his company was effectively dissolved his assets. Frozen pending civil restitution proceedings in his personal freedom, constrained by a set of conditions that his lawyers had negotiated with the particular desperate creativity of lawyers, whose client had very few cards left. 4 of the 11 affected property owners had legal proceedings underway to recover their land. 3 others had received financial settlements. The remaining cases were complicated by subsequent development and were still in process. Sandra Kelly was still at the county clerk's office, in the same position she had held for 19 years, and she had recently been appointed to a newly created county oversight committee for property transaction reviews. She had not made a public statement about her role in the case. She did not need to. Ryan Mitchell had been promoted. Caldwell had pushed for it personally in a written recommendation that was by all accounts unusually specific about the qualities that earned it, not just thoroughness and diligence, but the particular combination of integrity and courage that the job requires, and that is harder to train than any technical skill. Ryan had accepted the promotion with the same understated directness with which he did everything. He had called his sister in Spokane that evening, and she had said she was proud of him, and he had said thank you and meant it completely. Darnell still came through Red Valley every few weeks. He always stopped at the ranch. He and Jack would drink coffee in the kitchen and talk about nothing specific and everything that mattered the way men do when they have the kind of friendship that does not require explanation or occasion. Emily had started attending a support group in Billings for young adults with neuromuscular conditions. She drove herself. She had not asked Jack to come with her, and he had not offered because she had made it clear months ago that what she needed was not protection from hard things but confidence, that she could meet hard things on her own terms. He gave her that. He was learning imperfectly, but genuinely to give her that. The mineral rights question was not yet resolved. They had talked to 2 independent financial advisors and a land rights attorney and had arrived together at a framework for thinking about it, not what the money could buy, but what it was for, what Emily might need in 10 years, what a foundation for community development in Red Valley might look like, what it meant to have something and to choose carefully what you did with it. They had not decided yet, but they were deciding together. Besides, on a Saturday morning in late autumn, Jack was in the barn when Carolyn Mead from the flower shop pulled into the yard. She had said she was coming in person, and she had. She was carrying a small arrangement of something seasonal and unpretentious, which Jack appreciated because grand gestures had always made him uncomfortable. He came out of the barn wiping his hands. She held out the flowers. She said, "I should have known better. I knew you. I let a story replace what I knew." Jack took the flowers. He looked at them for a moment. "You came," he said. "That matters. It doesn't make it right." "No," he agreed, "but it's a start." She nodded. She seemed like she might say more and then decided that what she had said was enough, which Jack respected. She got back in her car. He watched her pull out of the yard. He looked at the flowers in his hands, small, ordinary, completely sincere. I went inside and put them in a glass of water on the kitchen table where Emily would see them when she got home. Then he went back to the barn because there was a motorcycle waiting and the work wasn't going to do itself, and the day was exactly as long as it had always been. The patch was still on the vest. It had not changed. It had not needed to. It was the same stitching, the same colors, the same symbol that people had been reading wrong for as long as Jack had worn it. It did not stand for what they feared. It never had. It stood for the man who pulled over on the highway when someone's trailer lost a wheel. The man who drove 200 miles to make a neighbor's delivery when the neighbor couldn't. The man who got up at 5 a.m. every day because someone needed him to, and who raised his hands in the cold morning air in front of deputies and said not a word about himself before he said everything about his daughter. It stood for the truth that communities sometimes have to be reminded of painfully and publicly, that the story you tell yourself about a person based on how they look is not their story. That a man's character is not in his appearance. It is in his 5 a.m. It is in the filing cabinet with the immaculate paperwork. It is in the way his daughter spreads documents across a kitchen table while he is sitting in a jail cell refusing to be helpless because he raised her to face hard things and she learned the lesson completely. The patch stayed. What changed was what people saw when they looked at it. And in the end, that was the only thing that ever needed to change. Not the patch, not the man, not the land that had been in his family for 3 generations. And that was going to stay in his family for 3 more. Just the seeing. Just the simple, necessary, long overdue act of looking at a person and choosing to see who they actually are. Not the story fear told you, not the assumption the patch invited, not the version that let you feel safe without doing the harder work of knowing. The truth. Jack Lawson had been the truth the whole time. The world just had to catch up.